The Sports Scouting Report with Lee Burkeen. Brought to you by Medine's Collision Center in Baton Rouge. Take control, choose Medine's. Grosse Savant Lodge, south of Lake Charles, the true sportsman's paradise. Treads and Care Company in Central, the tires you need, the service you want. Harvey Auto in Shreveport, Bossier City, the name you have trusted for years. And Gage in Baton Rouge. Get better connected with Gage. Here's your host, Lee Burkeen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lee Burkeen, host of the Sports Scouting Report podcast. Check us out. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube for free. It takes only about a minute. And we've got a great show. We're broadcasting from a great Italian restaurant on Perkins Road near Acadian and LSU. The Giulio Brothers Italian restaurant is homemade food. You got to come try it out. They also have brunch at 10:30 in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On Sundays, they have their full menu on brunch as well. Mike Johnson's the owner. Our guest today is Chris Blair, the voice of the LSU Tigers, Louisiana State University. Thank you, Chris.
Hey, Lee. Thanks for having me.
I called you. I'm glad you came.
Sure.
Short notice.
Oh, that's all right.
Did you have a good Christmas?
I did. Stayed here in Baton Rouge. There's so many events going on. College sports, really sports in general these days. They don't really take the holidays off. Yeah. So you couldn't get too far with basketball.
Get to relax your voice a little bit?
A little bit, but we still have a little fun. So, yeah, we had a great Christmas with the family.
Getting to know Chris Blair, I did my homework. Born in Hinman, Kentucky.
Yep.
Raised in Kentucky.
Yep.
And went to Lander University, South Carolina, but went to Hillcrest High School in Simpsonsville.
That's it.
South Carolina.
That's right. The Hillcrest Rams is where I finished high school.
You told me coal miner territory, though, in Kentucky.
In Kentucky, yeah. It's the eastern part of the state.
West Virginia area.
Yep, right near the Virginia line and the West Virginia line. And, coal mining was not just one of the industries. It was the industry where I grew up. So, it's a very special place to me. Still have a lot of lifetime friends and guys and girls I went to school with, as well as families, and so it's just the Eastern Kentucky boy living here in the Bayou.
I've got to ask Chris this: being that the state of Kentucky has Louisville, which I've been to Louisville, I've been to Kentucky and Lexington. You have Cincinnati, an hour and a half down, and you grew up near the West Virginia. PA's not too far away.
Not too far.
But pro-wise, I'm a Steelers fan.
It was the Bengals for the NFL, so
okay.
that was the team, which we got close.
Boomer Esiason?
Yeah, Boomer, big fan of Boomer, and Kenny Anderson before that. Of course, Joe Montana and the 49ers got the best of them in the Super Bowl way back when. But
Joel Alexander was a running back from LSU.
Yep, and so the Bengals and the Reds, obviously, with Major League Baseball.
Johnny Bench,
Johnny Bench, Big Red Machine, the whole gang. It was
that was an unbelievable team.
It was an unbelievable team. Their numbers.
How old were
incredible.
you when that was going on the bench? And
3,
Rose?
4, 5, 6 years old, and then of course after the Big Red Machine, kind of, some of the pieces. Not quite the way pro sports work today, but a few guys moved on, a few retired. But you still had Pete Rose and Johnny Bench for a number of years.
Joe Morgan.
I think Joe was one of the first to retire and then get into broadcasting. But you had George Foster. You had Dave Concepcion.
Yeah.
The Reds were a pretty good team even after their dominance as the Big Red Machine.
Yeah. Bo Harris played for the Bengals back then. He's an old Louisiana name, LSU. Went to Captain Shreve High School in Shreveport. But I remember that Cincinnati team with Kenny Anderson. He had that one loop on his helmet.
Old school
helmet where you could get the knuckles in. And he was a great one. People forget about Chris.
He really does. I mean, I bring that name up a lot because that was my first quarterback, if you will.
Yeah.
And people really give you a funny look. Some people, like you, remember the name and remember that team.
Yeah.
But, I think so. For the career he had, he's not as well known, obviously, as some of the others of his era.
Anthony Munoz.
Yep.
One of the greatest ever. They don't mention that name anymore.
Nope. It's, it's again, I think we, as you you know how it is.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is so fast
Yeah.
now. You consume it and then
Yeah.
you move on to the next. Where
Microwave.
You know, not to complain or not to sound
Right.
like the old guy, but it
Right.
seems like teams stay together longer. You got
Yeah.
a little more attached to the individuals.
Yeah.
I think now more it's your team, because your players are going to change
Yeah.
pretty regularly.
Free agency ruined it all for everybody. I wanted to Steel Curtain to stay together.
Except for the players. Ruined it for everybody except for the
Steel
players.
Curtain did stay together because free agency came after.
Yeah.
But I was a Jack Lambert, Jack Ham, Mean Joe Green fan, Mel Blount, Donnie Shell, that whole defense, and obviously Bradshaw and Swan and Stallworth and Mike Webster.
It's interesting to go back and watch not just the Steelers,
and
but
Franco just passed away.
Yeah,
I hate that,
absolutely.
Franco Harris.
But if you go back and watch those old films, NFL Films Vault, I mean, it's amazing what the game of
Unbelievable.
football looked like then compared to what it is now.
Huh.
I mean, it was pack a lunch and prepare to really feel it the next morning. Everybody.
And for a broadcaster, I mean, it was on. Like,
Yeah.
you could knock a guy out with your forearm. You could, after the play, knock a guy down. You could have brass knuckles. I mean,
It was
you
rough.
could have the stuff on your hands like Blitnikoff had with
Yep.
the Raiders.
Yep.
Stick them.
Yep, stick 'em. It was it was rough territory. Which again, I'm not complaining.
Yeah,
I think
right.
obviously safety is the best way to go, but that wasn't at the forefront of their minds back
Right,
then.
right. I wanted to ask you this. Everybody's got their favorite broadcaster growing up. Mine was Howard Cosell,
Mm-hmm.
only because he entertained me crazily. I mean, he was just different.
Yeah, it's interesting because people talk about Howard Cosell, and I think now you put him in that league of legendary broadcasters, but he
Yeah.
was not. In his day, he was very different from everybody else. He wasn't the straight man, so to speak. He was the more colorful of the one. And he was kind of put in Monday Night Football, like, where do you put him? I think more today he would probably be a sideline reporter, more so than he would have been in the booth. But when you say Howard Cosell, you're talking about one of the biggest names in the history of sports broadcasting. It was that if you really go study his work, it was very different.
It's interesting.
He wasn't your typical play-by-play announcer, and he wasn't your typical color commentator.
Sideline reporter. That's interesting. It would have been interesting to see him on the sideline.
Yeah.
Who was your favorite broadcaster growing up?
Well, I've always, I grew up in the broadcasting business. That's what my father did. So, I was always a little more radio. Like I've told this story 1,000 times. Growing up in Kentucky, we always followed Kentucky basketball. That's just part of the deal.
Adolph Rupp, yeah.
And so we always had the radio on. And of course, Kentucky was televised a lot more than a lot of schools, just because of the interest. So
With the three
even,
channels.
even if it wasn't on a national, the local Lexington channels carried the games live.
Yeah.
So we had a chance to watch most every game, especially the home games. But Dad always had the radio on. He'd have it in the kitchen. He'd have it back in the bedroom, maybe even in the living room. And Kaywood Ledford was the longtime voice of the Kentucky Wildcats. So the first voice I ever knew, heard, and kind of had an idea of what they did was Kaywood Ledford.
Wow.
And it just so happened to be he was one of the best to ever do it. And in fact, when Kentucky, back when they were, consistently NCAA tournament team, which they are now, but they were usually somebody that they thought would hit the Final Four.
Yeah.
If Kentucky lost, Westwood One hired Kaywood Ledford to do their national games of the Final Four. That's how well respected he was.
Wow.
So not only was he beloved by Kentucky fans, he was respected by broadcasters across the country. So that's not a bad one to emulate or
not bad at all.
to gravitate to. But, again, living where I lived, I had a chance to listen to Kaywood Ledford, the legendary John Ward, Tennessee, we could pick up from East Tennessee stations. Later moving to South Carolina, obviously Bob Fulton, longtime voice of the Gamecocks. And I had a chance in college to work with Jim Phillips, who was the longtime voice of the Clemson Tigers.
Wow.
So, Woody Durham's another one from North Carolina. We could pick them up. So I was, there was a lot. Paul Fife, by the way, grew up about 30 miles from where I grew up.
Wow.
And became the voice of Auburn for
Wow.
nearly 30 years. So,
Joe B. Hall was the coach at Kentucky that I grew up watching as a youngster. And I did not like Kentucky because they beat everybody badly back then. Like Sam Bowie would be on the bench at halftime, and
Sam Bowie, Melvin Turpin, Jim
Higgs,
Master,
and all those guys were
Kenny
just,
Skywalker.
boy, they were dominating.
They had
all
some
the
talent.
7-footers back then.
Yeah, they always had a back to the basket guy, and usually 2 or 3 of them. But that's how he built his teams.
Them or John Wooden would get them all. It would seem.
It's interesting growing up. High school basketball in Kentucky is probably similar to high school football in Louisiana. And you would go to these small gyms in late February for the district and regional tournaments. And I remember being at Hazard High School. I went with my father, who was covering the game, and they had a stage. So they had the gymnasium, and then they had a stage. Basically it was a gym plus auditorium. A lot of schools are like that, obviously. Before the game started, they brought 2 chairs, wooden school chairs. And on that stage, Denny Crum, the head coach of Louisville, and Joe B. Hall, the head coach of Kentucky, were there to watch a particular player or a couple of players. And those 2 sat on the stage probably from 20 feet away from where I was sitting. And they watched the whole game. And I was, probably 6, 7 years old, thinking those are 2 of the biggest icons in the state of Kentucky. Wow. And, of course, they were lifelong friends. And interesting, after they both retired, even though they competed against each other, they hosted a radio show together for a number of years.
Wow.
Obviously, before they got up in age. And, of course, Joe B. Hall just recently passed not too long ago. But so that was what it was like growing up in Kentucky.
Wow,
it was all basketball.
And, Chris, wasn't Denny Crum at UCLA with Wooden at one time?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. Well, they all, it's no different than today. The coaching tree. And it's interesting when you go back and see where they come from and how they took from that particular coach and then made it their own, because obviously Denny made a name of his own at the University of Louisville, which, by the way, having grown up in Eastern Kentucky, you are a Kentucky basketball fan first, and we referred to Louisville as the state of Louisville.
That's what I was going to ask.
There's Kentucky, there's Lexington, and then there's Louisville.
Because it's an hour away.
Yeah, and it's also, they have a lot of red, and the state is predominantly blue.
Great blue grass there, too, in Kentucky. And I want to mention that when I come back more with Chris Blair, I had an experience of a lifetime being a football guy, visiting Kentucky. I could not put the TV on a football game during basketball season. I want to share that with Chris, and I know that he would back it up.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because that's a basketball state. We'll be right back.
Listen, whatever you're driving right now, Tommy Harvey wants it. Bring it in to Harvey Subaru, Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City, or John Harvey Toyota. They're paying big bucks for all trades right now. They'll cut you a check right there. Tell them Lee sent you.
What does that bug man do?
Not only do we do pest control, we do odor control, bat removal, moisture control, rodents, and of course, bed bug control. Give the bug man a call. We get them before they get you.
Welcome back. Lee Burkeen, your host of the Sports Scouting Report podcast. Check us out on YouTube, where we've got a great follow on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube. It's free. You can go to Twitter. You can go to our website, lafootballmagazine.com, where we have people come on from all over Louisiana and outside Texas and Florida and Mississippi. And also go to wherever you get your podcast. We're on Podbean. We're on iHeartRadio, Google, all the different places you can get your podcast. I'm back with Chris Blair, voice of the Tigers, play-by-play for baseball, football, and basketball. And we're in basketball season. I don't want to mention the next game because by the time the show airs, we were already played an LSU game.
Right.
So that game would be played already, Arkansas.
Right.
But it is a gamut of teams coming up for LSU. Speaking of Kentucky.
Yeah, it's something about new coaches when they come to LSU in basketball. The SEC office does them very little favors. They usually have a very tough schedule coming out of the gate. So it's they open with Arkansas, then they go to Lexington to take on Kentucky at Rupp Arena, and then they all come just fast and furious. And to be honest with you, SEC basketball, the leaps that they have made over the last really 5 to 10 years in coaching, players, and facilities. It's a tough league, and there's really, it's like football. You talk about it all the time. Brian Kelly said it all season long. When you play in the SEC, you have to go win.
Yeah.
Anybody on any given day can beat you, and the same is true, especially this season when you look at the SEC basketball schedule.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, speaking of LSU basketball, what do you think of Coach McMahon? I mean, what do you think of him?
Well, I love Coach McMahon. I think he's a very skilled tactician, X's and O's kind of coach. And he's very laid back. And And when I tell people that, they're surprised because he obviously is a competitor, played college basketball at Appalachian State. He's been around some really good coaches. So it's built into him, that competitive fire. And when it's time to work between the lines, it's really fun to watch him in practice. He gets after the guys. He's detail-oriented. But once that's over, he's the most likable guy, got a great sense of humor, likes to have fun. I think he's got a great balance of work and play. And I think in this day and age, for players, they understand the work that has to be put in, but they also like the chance to enjoy what they're doing. Yeah. And it should be fun. And I think Matt has a great balance in that. And I've watched him, draw up some incredible plays. I mean, the ability of this team in his first year to execute underneath out of bounds, side court out of bounds plays that you can see him draw up, and obviously they've worked on it. He's impressive. Coach John Brady's very impressed with him and really enjoys him and says to me all the time, I like to watch him coach. I like to see the results. Mm-hmm. And more times than not so far this year, LSU's been able to execute, his design.
The Wake Forest game.
Yeah.
So you're doing the Wake Forest game, and I wanted to get your opinion. Down 23, 25.
20 points with 4:19 to go in the first half.
Incredible.
It was incredible. I mean, a neutral site, again, there were...
Early in the year.
Yeah, it was early in the year. It was in Atlanta. Wake Forest had a few people there. LSU had a few people there. So it wasn't like it was... You basically had to create your own energy.
Yeah.
And to be down 20 in a quiet arena, basically, and then still be able to get that spark going and come all the way back and then hold them, shows a lot about this team. And I'll say this about LSU and Matt McMahon, and I compliment him all the time about this. There's been a lot of close games, and there are games where he would tell you that team should have pulled away. LSU should have won by 12, should have won by 18, should have won by 23. Yeah. Just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Shots didn't fall, maybe they didn't rebound, whatever the case may be. But this team really has done a great job of, when it comes down to the final moments, being able to make the plays they need to make to win basketball games.
Closing them out.
I think that will serve them well, especially in conference play and maybe even beyond, just simply because they understand what has to be done during crunch time, when one play here or there, one dribble here or there, one bad pass here or there can make the difference in a win or a loss.
Earlier in the year, which is 2 or 3 weeks ago, UT Arlington.
Yeah.
That was a game that was very interesting to me, that was up and down, and they're not a bad team, UT Arlington. They were very feisty, very aggressive, but they've grown so much since that game, LSU, just watching them, figure out who they have. And
yeah, you're talking about a whole new team, 3 guys who are returning scholarship players for LSU.
Yeah.
Matt brought 3 from Murray State, his successful team a year ago that got into the dance. And then pieces from other places, other transfers. So you put this team together, and it's one thing to go out and be able to execute basketball. It's another to understand and know where your teammate's going to be, how they're going to respond, where their skill set is. And I think that's still kind of a job in progress, although I think they've made leaps and bounds. But there's been a number of games this year that, they've been able to just find a way to win.
And Chris, I'm impressed the way he works the bench.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he told us from the get-go. He said, look, there's a lot of pieces here I'm not sure of.
Yeah.
And he thought that maybe through the first 10, 12, 13, maybe even 15 games, he'd be able to hone in on what rotation best suits his team at a given point in the game. And I think he's getting closer there, but he is not afraid to look down the bench and go, all right, guys, we need a spark. I'm going to give you the opportunity. And he's also... doesn't wait very long that if you don't provide it, you'll be right back there sitting with him.
If you take a bad shot. He's like the old school coaches, like Denny Crum and those guys.
Yeah.
I want to mention, turning attention to football. You've had a chance to do some football for a few years at LSU, but what is the experience like Tiger Stadium for you?
It's I remember my late father came in 2016, which was my first year of football at LSU, and it was the Alabama game, which turned out to be a great game, and LSU had a chance. Jalen Hurts made a couple of plays late that was the difference in that one, if you remember. But my dad put it best. He walked out into his seats out of the tunnel right before kickoff. And he said it's like seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. I mean, it really is kind of, you have to take it all in for a moment, because the flash bulbs were popping. The place was rocking. And so this past fall, had the big win in 2019, grateful enough and lucky enough to be part of that 2019 team, winning over Alabama and Tuscaloosa, which was great. I mean, to win at Bryant-Denny. But I'd never experienced winning at Tiger Stadium over Alabama, and that was an experience that I will never forget.
That 219 game that you were calling, especially that Clyde Edwards couple of his touchdown runs, was, you could tell your voice was at another level of excitement.
Yeah, I mean, you just watch him go, and it was, they were guys in position to make tackles, and he just, much what he's doing now in the NFL, he just refused to go down.
Yeah.
I thought it was one of those classic games that you guys will all talk about years to come, is Clyde Edwards-Helaire's performance in 2019 against Alabama.
Man, those are some runs where he just ran through people.
Yeah, just it wasn't going to be stopped.
We were talking about that earlier with Kevin Falk and just determination. For
a lot of them here at LSU have had that
5'8", 220.
Bowling balls rolling downhill.
Baseball, you've had a chance to do a few years of baseball.
Yeah.
You came in with Paul Maneri.
Yep.
And now you have Jay Johnson, and he's recruiting every top 5 guy in the country, it seems. It seems like a matter of time, right, Chris, that this it's going to come together for Jay nationally with Omaha.
It's not going to be a matter of if. It's truly when.
Yeah.
And he's a guy, Jay Johnson, that he never stops. He's a guy that every single day of the year, 365, he's working to make LSU baseball better, whether that's recruiting, whether that's having to improve his staff or bring in new staff, making sure they've got all the technology that everybody has and the facility is top notch as it is at LSU. It's a matter of when, not if.
Chris, what out of all 3 sports?
I know where you're going.
You can't have a favorite.
No.
Because you do all 3.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, it depends on what time of year you ask me. If you ask me in early or mid-September and I'm sitting at the 50-yard line at Tiger Stadium taking in all that, I'm going to easily say, football by a mile.
Yeah.
You put me courtside at the Maravich Center, big SEC tilt. You ask me in January, I'll probably tell you it's basketball. And then sitting right behind home plate at one of the college baseball facilities when it comes to college baseball in the Alec Box, to be there, prior to first pitch of a big weekend series against Florida, against Vandy, against Arkansas, and the place is packed to the gills, I'll probably tell you it's baseball.
I want to ask you about this man here, Skip Burtman, the legend. I want to promote his book for him, Everything Matters in Baseball. Skip Burtman, you can go to Amazon, is what they told me to use to get the book from Skip. But what a
national treasure, and lucky enough that LSU gets to claim him, both as a head baseball coach and as an administrator and athletic director. It's just we throw that around a lot, Lee, one of a kind, but talking to all the former players. Talking to those who worked with him, maybe not even baseball players, that worked at LSU in the marketing department or in the sports information. When they talk about Skip Burtman, he's truly one of a kind, and there's no better stories when it comes to sports that also really are bigger than sports. It's about life. That obviously that Skip, has taught so many people. It's just great. I just think it's great. I have friends all over the country who, even if they're not huge college baseball fans, they know the name Skip Burtman, and they know what he did here at LSU. They remember watching some of those games on ESPN2 in the afternoons when our semesters would end in May. And they didn't know much about LSU, but they knew Skip Burtman, they knew LSU baseball. So the impact he's had not only on the athletic department, but the university as a whole is immeasurable.
Rupp at Kentucky, Wooden at UCLA, Burtman at LSU, 5 national championships, and did it in a decade, 5 out of 10 years.
It's amazing.
And I remember him saying, and I don't know if it's in his book or not, but the budget was so low when he started LSU, they had to give the baseballs back because they didn't have enough money in the budget to have baseballs. That's how this man started this
I was
program.
talking to Ben McDonald. Ben does the TV, of course, for a lot of games, and he's a great guy, great player. But Ben would laugh. He would put down in front of the dugout before one of the games, and they have a whole crew now at LSU that prepares the field before the game, between games. And Ben talked about how when he played for Skip, it was the team, it was the players that did all of the facility management. He said they don't
remember.
Yeah, they don't remember that, and he says it's very valuable, and I agree with it. We're
going to take a break. When we come back, more with Chris Blair. I want to talk about 3 legends that did broadcasting at LSU. One I grew up listening to. We'll talk about that and much more. We'll be right back.
Gros Savon Lodge, the true sportsman's paradise. Gros Savon Lodge has fresh and saltwater fishing, alligator hunting, waterfowl hunting, and eco tours located south of Lake Charles, Louisiana. Give them a call at 337-598-2357. That number to call again is 337-598-2357, and have the time of your life. Listen, whatever you're driving right now, Tommy Harvey wants it. Bring it in to Harvey Subaru, Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City, or John Harvey Toyota. They're paying big bucks for all trades right now. They'll cut you a check right there. Tell them Lee sent you.
Welcome back, Lee King, the Sports Scouting Report podcast. We're here at DiGiulio Brothers Italian Restaurant on Perkins Road, which is by Acadian, by LSU. If you love homemade Italian food, you have to come here. Look, if you just like garlic bread, Chris,
I know.
I
can smell it now.
I'm a huge garlic bread person. Best in town. The meatballs are gigantic, homemade.
No, it's fantastic food. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Not your
One of the first places I came to, actually,
really?
When I moved to Baton Rouge. Yeah, I was told you need to go there, and I did, and enjoyed every moment.
Mike would love to hear that. He's going to hear that. Mike Johnson, the owner. Getting back to broadcasting LSU, when I was a kid, I remember John Ferguson was the broadcaster at LSU, and he was an iconic guy. And when I just pulled this up, I didn't realize, but he did not call Billy Cannon's run.
Nope.
I didn't know that until I looked it up the other day, but it was Jace. I don't even know. J.C. Polites.
Yep.
Who filled in for John.
Yep, he filled in and had that magical moment, magical game, and his voice and his name is tied to one of the biggest plays in LSU football history.
Unbelievable.
How about that?
John was the broadcaster from the 50s. It don't even tell you exactly, but from the 50s to 83.
Yeah, it's interesting because, one of the things when I think about John Ferguson and talking to those who grew up listening to him and for those that really worked around him, he was very innovative. And another gentleman who really, I think, elevated LSU from a broadcast standpoint because of his ability to obviously call it on the radio, but then really get LSU, a couple of more steps into the visual medium of television. So there was radio for John, then there was some TV for some time, and then he came back and did some radio. But he was very innovative and really, was one of those in the SEC that was on the cusp of what's the latest technology. So I think that's a lot that he contributed to LSU.
I remember the first TV show, Chris, that came on when we had 3 channels was Charlie McClendon doing the TV show with John Ferguson. It was the first of its kind.
Yeah.
And me and my dad would watch it religiously, like you watch the Bengals or the Kentucky Wildcats in basketball.
It's amazing for kids to realize that when a live sporting event happened years ago, if you did not see it, that was it. I mean, you missed it.
Yeah.
And the weekly television show with some highlights, and the coach talking about it, that's the only way you could go back and get any semblance of what happened.
That was it.
So different now.
Now it's everywhere.
Pull your phone up and have it everywhere.
And then Jim Hawthorne from 79, I didn't realize it, but to 2016.
Yep.
You replaced Jim, retired, did a great job.
Yeah, I don't like to say replaced. I certainly don't.
He retired.
Yes, he retired, and I'm the next guy that took the job. But he is a legend.
How did you get to LSU? How did that story?
Well, it's funny. I've told it before. I was in Monroe, Louisiana with Georgia Southern where I was working at the time. We were playing a basketball game. It was, I want to say, mid to late February. We were eating crawfish at some sports pub in Monroe, and I get a phone call from a friend of mine who's in the business, and he says, hey, they announced Jim Hawthorne's going to go one more year of football and basketball, and then he's retiring. And I said, wow, I didn't hear that. I'm actually in Louisiana. And he said, I think you ought to apply for the job. He said, radio is important, still important. It's an important medium for LSU, even with all the ways you can consume Tiger athletics. So applied for the job, I guess, in late February, early March, and then eventually the process ended want to say in June of 2015. And they said,
Wow.
we'd love for you to come to Baton Rouge. And I said, tell me when, I'll be there. And eventually it was December of 2015. Started baseball in 2016.
Now you're already a transplant of Louisiana.
Love it. I tell people I grew up in the coal mining country of Kentucky, but I think I was meant to be born here. I mean, I love the food. I love the music. I love the culture.
It's grown on you.
Yeah, I think our entire family, consider themselves Louisianians, and it's a great place. It's a special place. It's a great place. It's a unique place, and we're thrilled to be able to call it home.
Chris, anybody you would like to thank on your staff? I
No,
know John
everybody.
Brady does a great job.
Yeah, John is the best. I mean, have him with me for basketball. And I tell you real quick, the great thing about John Brady is John can talk to any basketball mind in the country. He can break down X's and O's and films and talk about the down screens and this screens and all kinds of screens. And when he gets on the radio, he has the ability to take all of that knowledge and then relay it so that if you are someone who really knows the sport,
Layman terms,
you understand it.
Yeah.
But if you are someone who's just a casual basketball fan, you understand what's being done. I think that's his biggest gift, and that's why he's so popular on the radio. Not to mention he has the best places to eat when we go on the road, so I can't beat John. But I got a great crew, Doug Morrow and Gordy Rush, both former Tigers on the football broadcast. And then Doug Thompson, who played for Skip, LSU baseball, and Buzzy Hydell, who played for Paul, part of that national championship team. Those guys work with me on baseball throughout the year. Bill Franquez, the voice of Alec Box, he does the road games with me on the radio, which is a blessing. And then, we got a whole cast of characters. Marlon Favorite, former player, Brandon Taylor, former player, and super LSU fan, Hunt Palmer. So all of those guys work together to do what we do, and I appreciate every one of them.
Chris, tell everybody the dial if you're not in Baton Rouge, like if you're in Texas watching this show today, or
Want to hear an LSU game?
want to hear an LSU game?
LSU Sports mobile app's the easiest way to do it. Everything's on your phone. You can download it every time LSU starts. Our broadcast starts. It's one of the first things you'll see on the app. You just hit listen, and you're off and running.
To everybody in Louisiana, Chris Blair, the voice of the Tigers for basketball, baseball, football. Doesn't have a life, but he enjoys it. And appreciate you being on today, Chris. Thanks for taking the time to be a part of our show.
Lee, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. That's Chris Blair. We'll be back next week. We hope everybody had a great Christmas, too. I'm trying to join a gym and lose some weight all of a sudden, a lot of pies, and this and that. You get around your relatives. But again, I hope everybody had a great Christmas and Happy New Year by the time some of you will watch this show.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Scouting Report podcast with Lee Burkeen.